The seeker, Lian, wandered the temple gardens, her heart heavy with uncertainty. Despite years of meditation and teachings, a restless ache gnawed at her soul, a gnawing void that no amount of practice seemed to fill. It was as if she were chasing a shadow that forever eluded her. The wind stirred the leaves, a subtle reminder of nature's permanence, while she struggled to find stillness within. Every breath felt shallow, each thought fleeting. Her heart echoed with questions she couldn't answer. What is the point of all this? She had mastered the art of sitting quietly, but still her mind would not quiet. She had learned to speak Zen's teachings, but the words felt hollow. She sat by the still pond, gazing at her reflection, searching for something, anything, that might reveal her true path. But the reflection staring back seemed unfamiliar, as though the person she had become was someone she no longer recognized. The mentor, Master Jin, approached Lian as she sat by the temple pond, her face still etched with frustration. His presence was a quiet comfort, yet his words always seemed to cut through her confusion with profound simplicity. "Lian," he began softly, "you must let go of what you think you know." Lian looked up, searching his face for some explanation, but he remained silent. His eyes were calm, unwavering, as though he had seen through the layers of her doubts. She could not grasp the depth of his words, but something in her chest stirred, a faint flicker of hope. How could she let go when all she had ever known was the constant striving for clarity, for peace, for answers? The world around her seemed quiet, but her mind was a storm. The mentor's voice pierced the silence again. "Release the weight of your expectations, and the path will reveal itself." His words hung in the air, and for the first time, Lian considered that perhaps the answer was not something to be found, but something to be allowed. Lian felt the weight of the mentor's words, but they seemed as distant as the stars. She had always been taught that seeking was the path to peace, yet now she was being told to stop seeking. Her frustration boiled over. "But how can I stop?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What am I supposed to do if I just let go?" Master Jin smiled gently, but his response was simple. "You must learn to be with what is, not chase what is not." Lian frowned, unable to understand. To her, being was a passive state, one that seemed contrary to the constant effort she had put into her spiritual journey. "Isn't the search for peace the point?" she asked, confused. "The search itself is what creates the illusion," Master Jin replied, his voice low and steady. "You are not broken. You do not need to search. Peace is already within you, always has been." His words felt like a riddle, one she could not yet solve, but something inside her began to crack open. Perhaps this path was not about finding peace, but about uncovering what was already there. Lian tried to meditate again, her body in the familiar position, but her mind raced with thoughts. The sound of the wind outside the temple walls only seemed to heighten her restlessness. She kept hearing Master Jin's words echo in her mind, but the more she tried to quiet her thoughts, the louder they became. How could she stop searching when all she had ever known was to strive for peace? She felt as though she was fighting against the very nature of her being. The longer she sat, the more frustrated she became. "Let go," the words echoed again. But how could she release the tension, the yearning? In a fit of frustration, she opened her eyes, her breath shallow, heart racing. Master Jin stood silently by the door, watching her without judgment. "You must break before you can be whole," he said softly, his voice a calming presence. Lian looked at him, eyes filled with tears, as if to say, "I am already broken." But Master Jin only smiled and turned away, leaving her alone to face the turmoil within. Lian could no longer keep her emotions inside. The walls of the temple felt suffocating, and she needed to release the pent-up tension that had been building for days. She walked into the garden, where the wind had picked up, causing the trees to sway. As she breathed in the crisp air, her thoughts started to settle. Maybe the struggle wasn't in the meditation itself, but in her attachment to how she thought it should be. Her mind had created an expectation of peace, and that expectation had been the source of her turmoil. Master Jin's words echoed again in her mind. You must let go of what you think you know. The garden around her was peaceful, but her mind was still a whirlwind. Slowly, she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and focused on the present moment, no longer searching, but simply being. As the wind moved the branches above her, she realized that the path would not be something she could chase. It would be something she would allow to unfold naturally. Lian stood by the temple gates, her body rigid with both anticipation and dread. Master Jin had assigned her the task of meditating for hours on end, with no distraction or relief. At first, she thought this was a test of patience, a challenge to her resolve. But as she began, hours stretched into what felt like days. Her body ached, her legs stiff, her back sore, but worse than that was the flood of thoughts that would not cease. She had always been taught that silence was the key to understanding. But how could silence be achieved if her mind screamed louder than the wind? The sound of the temple bell tolled in the distance, marking the passage of time, but Lian felt no closer to peace. In fact, the longer she sat, the more agitated she became. Her thoughts seemed to swirl into a whirlwind of frustration, self-doubt, and questioning. What was the point of all this if she couldn't even control her own mind? After what felt like an eternity, Lian finally opened her eyes, blinking in the dim light. The room around her felt claustrophobic, as if the walls were closing in. She stood slowly, her legs numb from the long hours of sitting. Her gaze fell upon Master Jin, who had been silently watching her from the doorway. His face was as serene as ever, as though the meditation had been effortless. It is not about controlling the mind, Lian, he said softly, his voice breaking the silence like a ripple in water. It is about allowing it to be. In your struggle, you create resistance. Lian furrowed her brow. But how can I allow the chaos in my mind? She asked. By accepting it, Master Jin replied, his tone calm. Only by embracing your thoughts as they are can you begin to let them go. Stop fighting yourself. Her heart sank as she realized that her efforts to control her mind were only the source of her inner turmoil. She had been so focused on finding peace that she hadn't realized that peace was never something to be forced, only something to be allowed. The following days were filled with the same task, each day feeling longer than the last. Lian's frustration grew as she tried again and again to clear her mind, only to be swept up in a torrent of thoughts and feelings. One morning, during another attempt at meditation, she began to feel an intense inner conflict. Part of her wanted to surrender to the teachings, to let go and simply allow her thoughts to flow, but another part of her resisted, wanting to control every breath, every thought. The dichotomy within her felt unbearable. She was torn between two worlds, the world of the ego, which demanded control, and the world of Zen, which called for surrender. Master Jin watched from a distance, his presence barely noticeable, but his words came as a steady whisper on the wind. You cannot force what is meant to come naturally, Lian. Stop trying to bend the world to your will. Be with what is. Her chest tightened as she realized that it was not the world that needed to change, but her relationship with it. It was her resistance to the present moment that had been holding her back. After several days of struggle, Lian finally collapsed in a heap on the temple floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Her efforts to control her thoughts had left her feeling hollow, as if every ounce of energy had been drained away. Master Jin approached her silently, kneeling beside her as he had done so many times before. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying gentleness that spoke volumes. You are tired because you are trying to control something that cannot be controlled, he said softly. Lian felt the weight of his words sink into her like a stone. For the first time, she considered that perhaps peace was not something she could chase or demand. Maybe it was something that could only be allowed, accepted. She closed her eyes, letting out a shaky breath. Master Jin placed a hand on her shoulder, not as a teacher, but as a fellow traveler on the path, guiding her without judgment. The next morning, Lian awoke with a new sense of clarity. Her body still ached from the previous days of meditation, but her heart felt lighter. She stood up slowly, no longer filled with the overwhelming urge to control everything around her. The stillness of the temple felt different now, not oppressive, but comforting. Master Jin had left her with the understanding that peace was not something to be found through force but through acceptance. As she moved through the temple grounds, the wind no longer felt like an enemy, but a companion. She realized that the search for peace was not about running toward something, but about standing still and letting it come to her. Her mind, once a battlefield, was now a quiet garden, and she knew that the path ahead was not about reaching a destination, but about simply walking with awareness and presence. Lian sat cross-legged by the temple's koi pond, her gaze fixed on the rippling water. Days had passed since she began her new practice of surrender, but it still felt unnatural. Every moment of stillness was met with a barrage of thoughts. Despite her growing awareness, there were moments when her mind slipped back into the familiar patterns of seeking, chasing after peace like a distant star. Today, as she watched the koi swim gracefully through the water, her thoughts remained tangled, caught between the desire for control and the need to let go. Suddenly, Master Jin appeared beside her, his figure tall and composed against the backdrop of the serene temple. He observed her in silence for a moment before speaking. "You have come a long way, but your mind is still chained by the need to be perfect," he said, his voice soft but firm. Lian's heart sank. "What do you mean?" she asked, confusion filling her eyes. "Even in your meditation, you are striving to reach a goal. You must release the idea of perfection. It is the need for perfection that causes suffering, not the practice itself." His words resonated with her like a bell ringing in the quiet, and she realized that her greatest obstacle was her attachment to the idea of how things should be. Perhaps it was time to fully surrender to what was, without the weight of expectation. The days that followed were filled with moments of struggle, but also moments of clarity. Lian spent countless hours meditating, but it was not until she fully embraced her imperfections that a breakthrough occurred. Sitting alone in the temple courtyard, she was surrounded by the fragrance of incense and the distant sound of a bell ringing. Her body felt stiff, her mind restless, but as she sat in silence, a profound shift occurred. It wasn't sudden nor dramatic, but she felt something inside loosen, as though the tight grip of control was slipping. For the first time, she didn't try to control her thoughts, she simply observed them. She could feel the space between her thoughts expanding, like the wind sweeping through the open space of the temple grounds. It was then that she understood the true meaning of Master Jin's words. Surrendering did not mean giving up, but letting go of the need for control. With this realization, Lian felt a wave of peace wash over her, quiet and unassuming, but undeniably present. As days passed, Lian began to notice subtle changes within herself. Her reactions to situations became less charged, and the anxieties that once defined her practice started to fade. One evening, while sitting beneath a large tree in the temple garden, Master Jin came to sit beside her. His presence was comforting, but tonight there was something different in the air. "What do you see when you look at the tree?" he asked softly, his voice barely a whisper against the rustling leaves. Lian looked at the tree for a long moment. It was ancient, with thick branches that reached toward the sky, its leaves swaying gently in the evening breeze. "I see a tree," she replied. "Strong, steady, and rooted." Master Jin nodded, his eyes warm. "And yet, the tree is constantly changing. The leaves fall, the branches grow, the seasons shift. It never resists change. It simply exists in each moment. The tree does not strive for perfection. It simply is." Lian closed her eyes, the wisdom of his words sinking deep into her heart. She realized that, like the tree, she too had the capacity to simply be, changing, evolving, without the need for control. Lian now understood the true essence of her practice. It was not about striving for something, but about allowing everything to be as it was. The more she embraced this truth, the more her perception of the world shifted. One morning, after a particularly long meditation session, she stood before the temple bell, staring at its weathered surface. The bell had been ringing for centuries, its sound resonating across the land. Master Jin approached her from behind as always, his footsteps light and quiet. "The bell does not strive to make a sound," he said. "It simply rings when it is struck. In the same way, your true nature is always present. You do not need to force it." Lian looked at the bell and then back at Master Jin, finally grasping the depth of his words. She realized that she too was like the bell, waiting to be struck by the present moment, to allow her true nature to ring out without resistance. Lian felt a deep sense of peace within her as she moved through each day, no longer burdened by the need to control or perfect her practice. One afternoon, as she walked through the temple gardens, she reflected on the transformation she had undergone. It was not a sudden change, but a gradual unfolding, like the petals of a flower opening to the sun. Her relationship with her mind had shifted. Rather than seeing it as a source of distraction, she now viewed it as a companion on her journey. As she walked, she could hear the rustling of leaves in the trees and the distant sound of a stream flowing, but within, there was stillness. Master Jin appeared beside her, his presence like a grounding force. "What is the sound of the stream?" he asked. Lian smiled, a soft, peaceful smile. "It is the sound of water flowing," she said. "But it is also the sound of everything, life, change, and stillness, all at once." Master Jin nodded in approval. "You have begun to hear the sound of life itself, Lian. You are no longer striving for peace. You are simply being." Lian stood at the temple's edge, the early morning mist lingering in the air like a quiet breath. Her meditation practice had reached a point where she felt a deep sense of peace. But today something different stirred within her. It was as if the ground beneath her feet was shifting, pulling her into a place of raw vulnerability. Master Jin had given her no tasks for the day, no guidance other than to simply be with herself. Yet, as the hours passed, Lian's mind began to swirl with doubts and anxieties that she had thought she had already let go. Why was she still struggling, even when she had seemingly achieved peace? Why did it feel as though a storm was brewing beneath the still surface? As the wind stirred the trees around her, she felt something within her crack. She wasn't sure what it was, but it was a deep, primal feeling that she could not ignore. She wasn't sure if it was fear, anger, or something else, but it gripped her chest tightly, almost suffocating her. Master Jin appeared silently beside her, his presence gentle yet unwavering. "To let go is not to forget," he said softly. "It is to allow yourself to feel everything without attachment." Lian closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Perhaps it was time to confront the storm within. As Lian sat by the edge of the temple's koi pond later that day, the storm inside her began to grow. It was as if a dam had broken, and everything that had been buried inside of her was now rushing to the surface. Her hands clenched at her sides as she fought to contain the tears welling up in her eyes. The anger, the grief, the frustration, all of it came crashing through her like an unstoppable wave. Master Jin had always said that peace came from accepting all things, but how could she accept these overwhelming emotions? The pain she felt now seemed too deep, too raw to just let go. She stood abruptly, her breathing ragged, and began pacing back and forth. Master Jin watched from a distance, his gaze unwavering. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Lian stopped and looked at him. "I don't know how to let go," she said, her voice trembling. "I feel like I'm breaking apart." Master Jin nodded slowly, his voice calm and understanding. "You are not breaking apart, Lian. You are breaking open. It is only by breaking that we can truly grow." The night brought no relief. Lian lay in her simple room, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The emotions that had surfaced during the day still burned brightly within her. She felt raw, exposed, as though she had opened a door that she couldn't close. Every time she tried to push the feelings away, they came back stronger, as though the more she resisted, the more they grew. She could hear the distant wind howling outside, but inside, the storm raged on in her heart. It was not just anger or grief now, it was the overwhelming feeling of not knowing who she was anymore. She had spent so long trying to be the perfect disciple, the perfect monk, but in doing so, she had buried every part of herself that didn't fit that mold. Now, everything that she had pushed aside for so long was demanding to be seen. She sat up, her heart pounding in her chest. It was then that she realized the only way to find peace was not to suppress these feelings, but to allow them to flow through her. Master Jin had said that peace was not about denying anything, but about embracing it all. She stood and walked to the window, staring at the moonlit garden. For the first time, she didn't try to force the emotions away. She simply allowed herself to feel everything, and in that moment, the storm within her began to quiet, not because it was gone, but because she had stopped fighting it. The next day, Lian woke with a feeling of deep stillness. It wasn't the kind of stillness she had felt when she was in control or forcing her practice. It was a more natural stillness, as though she had finally come to terms with everything that had been brewing inside. She walked to the temple garden, where Master Jin waited, as he always did. Today, he said nothing, but simply gestured for her to sit beside him. As she settled into the familiar spot, she noticed that the flowers in the garden had bloomed overnight, their petals open and vibrant in the morning light. She looked at Master Jin, a quiet smile forming on her face. "It's funny," she said softly. "I spent so long trying to fight everything inside me, and only when I stopped resisting did I find peace." Master Jin nodded, his face calm. "Peace does not come from resisting, Lian. It comes from embracing everything that is, just as it is. You are no longer fighting yourself." Lian closed her eyes and took a deep breath, allowing the stillness to settle within her like the calm after a storm. As Lian walked through the temple grounds that afternoon, she felt a profound sense of peace, not because the storm within her was gone, but because she had finally stopped trying to fight it. She understood now that true peace didn't come from controlling the world or her emotions. It came from accepting everything as it was. Her heart felt lighter, her breath deeper, as if a weight had been lifted. She saw the beauty in the world around her, the simplicity of the trees, the rustling of the leaves, the sound of the temple bell in the distance. It was as though everything she had ever needed was right here, in the present moment. The more she embraced her own imperfections, the more she saw the beauty in everything, even the things she had once tried to suppress. Master Jin appeared beside her, walking silently, his presence steady and reassuring. "Are you at peace now?" he asked. Lian looked at him, her heart full. "I am," she said softly, "and I think I always was." Lian woke up to a soft morning breeze filtering through the temple windows, the golden light of dawn spilling into her room. She had spent the last few days walking through the temple grounds, lost in a sense of deep inner peace. The struggles she had once faced seemed distant, as though they belonged to another person. Yet, despite the peace she felt, there was a subtle undercurrent of uncertainty. She knew she had reached a place of acceptance, but a small voice in the back of her mind wondered if she had truly found the answer. Was peace permanent? Or was it simply another fleeting illusion? Master Jin had often spoken of the impermanence of all things, including peace. The idea echoed in her mind as she walked to the garden to sit by the koi pond, the very same spot where her journey had begun. She looked out at the water, watching the koi swim gracefully, unaware of the stillness that had descended within her. Today, she didn't seek answers or strive for anything. She simply sat in the moment, letting everything be as it was. As the breeze caressed her face, she realized that this peace, though fragile, was real. It wasn't something to hold on to tightly, but something to live within, moment by moment. Days passed, and Lian found herself settling into a rhythm of quiet acceptance. There were no more battles with her thoughts, no more resistance to what was. Master Jin had once told her that true freedom came not from the absence of thoughts, but from the freedom to let them flow without attachment. She had learned this lesson well, though not without difficulty. There were still moments when doubt crept in, moments when she questioned whether this peace was truly lasting. But each time it came, she allowed it to be, knowing that it was only a passing cloud in the vast sky of her awareness. One afternoon, as she walked along the temple path, she was joined by the fellow disciple, a quiet, calm presence in the temple who had always seemed so far ahead on the path. Today, the fellow disciple was different. There was a visible vulnerability in their eyes, a sense of searching. "What if this peace isn't real?" Lian asked, her voice soft. The low disciple paused for a moment before answering, their voice steady yet tinged with an unspoken sadness. "Peace is always real, but we are not perfect. And sometimes we forget it. It is the forgetting that causes the suffering, not the peace itself." Lian nodded, realizing that even those who seemed to have found the way had their own struggles. The path was not about perfection, but about returning to peace, over and over again. That evening, as Lian sat by the temple bell, she reflected on the many lessons she had learned throughout her journey. The bell, weathered and ancient, stood silent, waiting for the next moment of sound. Master Jin joined her, his presence a calming force in the quiet night. "The bell rings not because it wants to, but because it is struck," Master Jin said, his voice low and measured. Lian looked at him, the wisdom of his words sinking in. "I think I understand now," she said quietly. "I spent so long trying to make myself perfect, thinking that peace would come from that. But now, I see that peace is not something to achieve, but something that already exists, waiting to be awakened." Master Jin nodded. "Yes, peace is not something we search for, but something we uncover by letting go of the search itself." The night grew still, as the bell echoed softly in the distance. And Lian closed her eyes, allowing the sound to resonate within her. The journey had not been about finding peace. It had been about allowing it to come naturally with every step she took. In the days that followed, Lian began to move through her practice with a newfound sense of ease. There was no more urgency to her steps, no more rush to achieve some future goal. She found joy in the simplicity of each moment, the way the sun filtered through the leaves, the soft sounds of the temple bells, the quiet conversations with fellow disciples. It was in these small, seemingly insignificant moments that Lian began to realize that peace had always been here, waiting for her to notice. One morning, Master Jin invited her to walk the temple path with him, a silent, meditative stroll that they had shared many times before. But today, there was a lightness to Lian's steps, as if she were walking on air. "Do you ever feel that there is no end to this journey?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. Master Jin smiled. "There is no end, only continuous unfolding. You will not find peace at the end of the path, but in every step you take." Lian smiled as well, understanding at last that peace was not a destination to reach, but a way of walking through the world, one step at a time. As Lian stood at the edge of the temple grounds that evening, gazing out at the horizon, she realized that she had come full circle. The journey she had embarked on was not one of seeking or striving, but one of becoming aware of what was already within her. The wind blew gently through the trees, and the soft rustling of the leaves sounded like a whisper of approval. For the first time, she felt a deep sense of acceptance, of herself, of her path, and of the world around her. The search for peace was over, not because she had found it, but because she had learned to let go of the need to find it. Master Jin stood beside her, as calm as ever, watching the same sunset. "You have arrived," he said softly. Lian smiled, her heart full. "I have," she replied, "and I think I'm ready to continue walking." Lian stood quietly at the temple gate, looking out over the fields that stretched to the horizon. The journey that had once felt endless now seemed like a distant memory. She had learned that peace was not something to grasp, but something that unfolded naturally, like the passing of time. The stillness within her was now permanent, like the calmness of the early morning mist. As the first rays of the sun touched her face, she whispered, "I am here, not as a statement, but as a realization." Peace had always been within. The wind whispered through the trees as Lian walked slowly through the temple gardens. She had found a deep sense of gratitude in the present moment, something she had once sought desperately. Now, the simple act of walking felt like a celebration of life itself. Every step was filled with awareness, not of some distant goal, but of the beauty of each breath, each moment. Master Jin had been right. The journey was not to find peace, but to realize that peace had always been there, waiting patiently for her to awaken. Lian sat beside the ancient temple bell, feeling its presence resonate deep within her. The bell had never sought to be heard, but its sound still echoed across the land. In the same way, Lian had come to understand that her own peace did not need to be sought or controlled. It was already there, waiting to be embraced. As the evening bell tolled in the distance, she closed her eyes and listened. The sound was not a call to action, but a reminder of the stillness that filled every moment, even in the midst of change. One morning, as Lian stood at the temple's edge, watching the sun rise over the mountains, she felt a sense of completeness that she had never imagined possible. She was no longer searching for peace or striving for answers. She had simply become part of the flow of life, just like the wind, the trees, and the seasons. In the stillness, she realized that peace wasn't a destination but a way of living, present, engaged, and aware. The past and future no longer seemed to matter. All that remained was the beauty of this moment. As the days passed, Lian found herself walking through the temple grounds, a quiet smile on her lips. She had come to understand that peace was not something to strive for, but something to live. She had embraced the present moment and accepted everything that came with it. Her journey was not about perfection or destination. It was about living with awareness and presence. One evening, as Master Jin appeared beside her, she looked up at him with a sense of gratitude. "I understand now," she said softly. "Peace is always within, and it's always here." The time had come for Lian to leave the temple. Though it felt as if she had only just begun her true journey, the path ahead called her forward. Master Jin had always spoken of the world as a mirror, reflecting back what we needed to learn. As she stood at the gates of the temple, ready to take her first steps back into the world, she realized that her inner journey had only just begun. The peace she had cultivated within would be her guide, and she would walk with awareness, letting go of the need to control. There was no more seeking, only living. As Lian walked through the village on her way out of the temple, she felt a mix of excitement and uncertainty. The world outside the temple was vast, filled with distractions and noise. But the calm she had found within was unwavering. She could feel the breeze on her skin, hear the distant chatter of people, and yet she remained centered. The teachings of Master Jin had prepared her for this moment. "Live each moment as it comes," he had said. And now, Lian would do just that. She was no longer bound by expectations, but free to experience life in its fullness. As Lian continued her journey, she encountered many challenges, people, situations, and emotions that tested her newfound peace. But each time she returned to the present moment, to the teachings she had learned. There was no rush, no pressure to be perfect. She began to understand that life was not about avoiding difficulties, but about facing them with clarity and compassion. With each encounter, she grew stronger, her sense of peace deepening. She no longer needed to seek validation or approval from others. Her peace came from within. After months of traveling, Lian found herself standing at the edge of a vast open plain. The horizon stretched endlessly before her, and she felt a sense of awe at the beauty of the world. It was in this vastness that she understood. Life was limitless. There was no end to the journey, only the continuous unfolding of each moment. She had learned that peace was not a destination but a way of being. As she gazed at the endless sky, she felt a deep connection to the world around her. Her heart was open, and she was ready to meet whatever came next. Lian now knew that her journey would never truly end. Peace was not something to possess, but something to live. With each step she took, she embraced the beauty of the present moment, free from attachment and fear. As she looked back at the road she had traveled, she smiled softly, knowing that every challenge, every struggle had been part of the path that led her here. The journey was the destination. And as she continued on, she was no longer searching for peace, she had become peace itself.